This night was supposed to be ordinary. I was driving down a deserted, quiet highway when strange static started coming through the radio. It sounded like someone was speaking, but the words were in an unfamiliar language. A minute later, my headlights illuminated a figure standing right in the middle of the road. It was a person, if you could even call it that. They stood completely still, with an empty gaze, and their face was unnaturally elongated, like an old mannequin. As I slowed down to avoid hitting them, they raised a hand, and my engine died. Now I know, you should never stop at night. Especially on this highway. Because what happened next, can't be put into words. Asterisk. The voice in my head was like a thunderclap on a clear day. It didn't just echo, it vibrated, cutting through every cell in my body. I clutched my ears with my hands, but it didn't help. The words kept booming, and with them came excruciating pain. It felt like my skull was splitting open from the inside. I tried to scream, but my throat was paralyzed. Meanwhile, the figure remained standing by the car, watching me. Its face no longer seemed empty. I saw something horrifying, a slow, deliberate smile forming where its lips should have been. I don't know what drove me in that moment, fear or desperation, but I grabbed my phone. No signal, no service, just static and white noise. But it was my only chance. I turned on the camera, pointed it at the figure, and hit record. As soon as the screen lit up, the figure suddenly pulled its hand away from the car. It froze, then took a few steps back, as if startled. The voice in my head returned. You must not see. You must not remember. My phone instantly shut off, its screen flickering with green static. The figure stopped retreating. It was now staring directly into my eyes. And that's when I felt something moving behind me. In the rearview mirror, I saw a shadow flicker. Then another. They were moving too fast for me to count. Were there dozens? Hundreds? All of them were surrounding the car. A dull thud echoed through the cabin. First from one side, then the other. Thin fingers began drumming on the windows, leaving behind marks that looked like deep scratches. I had no idea what to do. The only thing left was to scream. I shut my eyes and screamed as loud as I could. And then, everything stopped. When I opened my eyes, it was morning. The car was parked in the middle of the highway, as if nothing had happened. No marks, no scratches, no strange symbols on the hood. But that wasn't the strangest part. The most terrifying thing I realized was when I turned on my phone to check the recording. It had saved. On the video, I could see myself. I was sitting in the driver's seat, motionless. Outside the car. Nothing. No strange figure, no shadows, no sounds. Just me. But at one point, the camera focused on my face, and I saw it. My eyes. They were black, asterisk. I stared at the screen of my phone, unable to believe my eyes. This wasn't me. Or rather, it was my face, but with foreign eyes, dead, bottomless black. They seemed to look straight through me, like two black holes. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, not knowing what to do next. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a camera glitch or a play of light. But the longer I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, the more I noticed something wrong. My eyes, they looked different. Not completely black, but the shadow of something alien was unmistakably there. I started the engine, and this time, the car started. The highway ahead was empty, no figures, no traces. But the feeling of being watched never left me. I drove home, locked the doors, and shut all the windows. I threw my phone into a drawer, trying not to think about what I'd seen. All I wanted was to forget. But forgetting didn't happen. That night, I woke up with the feeling that someone was in the room. The air felt thick and heavy, and a shadow flickered in the corner of the bedroom. I tried to turn on the light, but the lamp wouldn't turn on. Then I heard the voice again. "You can't hide. You are one of us." I wanted to scream, but the words got stuck in my throat. In that moment, something cold touched my leg. I looked down and saw long, thin fingers stretching out from under the bed. I jerked back, falling to the floor, and saw the creature slowly crawl out from under the bed. It no longer tried to disguise itself. Its skin was gray, its eyes still bottomless, and from its stretched mouth came a soft whisper. "We are one with you." I backed toward the door, but there was a crackling sound behind me. Turning around, I realized it was the mirror. In its reflection, there was no sign of me or the room. Instead, there was that same dark highway, and figures with black eyes were slowly moving toward me. I don't remember how I ran out of the house, how I ended up in the car. The only thing I remember for sure is the sound of sirens and flashing lights suddenly filling my reality. A police checkpoint stopped me on the road. The officer walked up to my window and looked inside. "Everything okay? You look unwell." I nodded, not knowing what to say. He looked at me more closely, then suddenly grabbed his radio. "Need backup. He's one of them." At that moment, I understood, it's not over. I've become part of something bigger, something that can't be explained. When the officer spoke into his radio, his voice became foreign, as if he were speaking not from the outside but directly into my mind. Suddenly, I felt a strange pressure in my chest, and the air in the car became unbearably heavy. I looked around, empty, but I knew they were near. They were always near. The officer suddenly stopped, as if turned to stone. His gaze became completely vacant, and his hands slowly lifted, touching my door. I tried to push him away, but his hand slid as though he were not human, but something else, something without a body. Instead of fingers, there were black, elongated tendrils, sinking into the metal of the car. "Do you understand that you can't leave now?" His voice, despite his physical absence, rang in my head. I didn't know what to do. The car wouldn't start. I was trapped again. Then, out of nowhere, a strange light appeared in the sky, a bright green glow, like the one I saw that night on the highway. It swirled, like a fiery veil, and with each passing moment, it became brighter. The officer lifted his head, his eyes, just as black as the creature's, began to glow, reflecting the light. There were no emotions, no fear in his gaze. He was empty. "We've taken you," he said, and his mouth twisted into a smile that seemed endless, as infinite as the darkness itself. Suddenly, it became clear to me, I wasn't just an observer of these events. I had become part of something that couldn't be avoided. I felt my thoughts begin to blur, and my perception of the world started to distort. That light, swirling in the sky, began to penetrate my mind, filling it. I could feel a part of me disappearing, dissolving in the light. My senses lost clarity, and my body became heavier, as if it were bound to some other reality. I realized with horror that I had become part of their world. Part of me was no longer human. And then it hit me, this entire night, both the one that led me here and this one, wasn't a coincidence. I had been chosen to become a link in their chain. The strange beings, who turned out not to be aliens in the traditional sense, were shadows, ancient forces living in parallel worlds, watching us, choosing those who would become part of their darkness. "You can't leave now," the officer repeated, but this time his voice was different, echoing the reverberations of the universe. "We are all one entity, and so are you. Do you understand this?" As if this were a signal, another beam of light descended from the heavens, and I felt it pierce my body, my thoughts. Instantly, I found myself in a different place. Not in the car, not on the road, but in some boundless space. Everything was dark, and at the center of this cosmos, I saw a figure. It was the creature that had stood before my car. It stared at me with the same vacant gaze, but now it had become part of this space. It was everywhere, in every corner of this boundless world. There was nothing human in its eyes, only cold, all-consuming absence. And then I understood. This was all part of their game. They hadn't just taken me. They had taken my mind, my soul, to use their worlds, their realities, for their eternal tyranny. I was forever one of them. Here's the translation of your text into English. In this boundless space, I felt like a tiny grain of sand in the void, but now I knew that this void wasn't just space. It was their world. I was in the very heart of their universe, where time didn't matter, and space didn't obey the laws I knew. The creature standing before me took a step forward. Its figure began to dissolve, turning into something intangible, like smoke that doesn't burn. There were no eyes or mouth on its face anymore. It was emptiness, but in that emptiness, I felt its presence. You will not understand, its voice was not like before, but like an echo, the reverberations coming from all directions. You have become part of us. We have always been around, you just couldn't see us. We are your fears, your nightmares. We are the ones you always fear, but you don't realize we are the ones controlling you. Your reality is just our imprint. I couldn't move. Every attempt to resist felt pointless. My hands, my legs, everything became heavy and numb, as if I were trapped in a time prison, from which there was no escape. But, why? I asked, even though I knew I no longer had the right to ask questions. It felt as though they had taken not only my body but my right to question, to find meaning. The creature smirked. Its movement was unsettling. It moved like a shadow, but I saw the light in this space shift. I was no longer in the car, not standing on the road. I was nowhere but everywhere at the same time. We do not need your understanding. You are just a piece in our game. You have become part of our flow, and your role is to witness how we take over this world. We are all here to observe. We do not interfere in your lives, but we control everything. We are what you call reality. And then, in the moment when I tried to comprehend these words, everything changed. The space began to contract, as if the spreading shadows were collapsing into one point. I felt the air around me grow dense, as though the very air was consuming me. The creatures disappeared, but their presence remained, like darkness that cannot be seen, but is still felt. And in that moment, I realized a terrible truth. I had become part of their game. A game with no end or beginning, only an endless loop. But this wasn't the end. When everything became dark and empty again, I felt a slight movement in my body. I knew that this emptiness wouldn't last forever. I could once again be part of the world, part of reality, but I was no longer who I had been. I couldn't return. I was forever with them. With this knowledge, I felt something invisible wrap around me again. I was neither alive nor dead. I had become what they had sought. I had become what they were. Now I was one of them. A shadow. And everything I saw was just a reflection of their world. And when I finally opened my eyes, I realized that the world I returned to wasn't quite real. It was distorted, changed. Something was wrong with it. I was still with them.